Today we will go back in time to learn about the fate of three women: Laura, Madeleine, and Mary. The press called them murderers, demons, and a disgrace to the sexes. But were they products of the society that created them? A society where women were considered property, denied the right to divorce, and subjected to double standards of morality. Perhaps their violent actions were not only personal crimes, but also a cry of outrage against the shackles of the Victorian era. Stay with us until the end to understand more about the lives and fates of these three women.
We are about to dissect a tragedy born out of the fevered years of the 19th century. So take a deep breath and we will step out onto the restless waterfront of San Francisco, then trace our way back to a girlhood far from the Pacific coast. Laura Ann Hunt, later known to the world as Laura D. Fair, was born on 06/22/1837 in Holly Springs, Mississippi. Her family were not destitute, but they did not belong to the secure ranks of the well-to-do. Her father worked in trade, moving the family as opportunities shifted, first within the South, and then to New Orleans, where river traffic and commerce promised a better living. Whatever schooling she received was modest and practical, enough to read, to write a clear hand, and to keep simple accounts. From early on, she would have helped her mother with the work of the household, learning how fragile respectability could be when money was never quite abundant, and the future depended on the choices others made on her behalf. In her mid-teens, with her father dead and money already uncertain, Laura's family turned to the solution most available to a young woman in the 1850s South: marriage. She wed William Stone, an older liquor dealer in New Orleans, gaining for a brief time a measure of security and a place in respectable society. His death, not long afterward, left her a widow while she was still little more than a girl. She spent a short period at a convent school, intending to become a teacher, then entered another brief and unhappy marriage that also ended in separation. With prospects in New Orleans diminished, she went west with her mother to California, keeping boarding houses and edging into the rough, shifting society that ringed San Francisco Bay. In the years after those early broken unions, Laura's life followed the restless line of the new Pacific world. She kept lodging houses with her mother, first in San Francisco and then in the booming mining town of Virginia City, where silver money flooded through the streets and vanished just as quickly. She gained a reputation as a capable landlady, able to manage staff and guests, but the work was uncertain, and there was never quite enough money to give her true independence. It was in that setting, among lawyers, speculators, and officials drawn to the Comstock, that she met Alexander Parker Crittenden, an experienced attorney with a wife and children in California. Over time, a connection deepened into a long, irregular relationship that stretched over 7 years, shifting with his legal work between Nevada and San Francisco. Laura believed and said later that he promised to divorce his wife and marry her, that each year of waiting tied her reputation and her daughter's future more tightly to his decision. As his promises failed to turn into action, the strain grew heavier. It was later reported that her health faltered, that sleeplessness and anxiety took hold, while her finances remained precarious, and gossip about the liaison began to darken the edges of her social standing. On the Feb 11, 1870, the long, uneven course of their relationship narrowed to a single crossing of San Francisco Bay. That afternoon, Alexander Parker Crittenden boarded the ferry El Capitan with his wife Clara and some of their children, taking seats on the deck as the steamer moved out into the water. A little later, passengers noticed a woman dressed in black, veiled, walking the deck with a tense, searching purpose. As the boat neared midstream, she went straight to where Crittenden sat with his family, spoke words that others would remember as an accusation that he had ruined her and her child, and drew a small, sharps pistol, raising it toward his chest. Passengers on the El Capitan later said there was only a single sharp report above the steady noise of the paddles. Alexander Crittenden slumped where he sat, and at once the quiet routine of the crossing broke apart. Some of those nearby caught his falling body and eased him down, while others seized the veiled woman and wrenched the pistol from her hand. There was no chance for escape. The ferry was in midstream, the deck crowded, and all eyes had turned to the same small, terrible scene. When the boat reached the San Francisco wharf on 11/3/1870, crew and passengers carried Crittenden ashore and brought him to a nearby house. Doctors were summoned. They found a serious wound to the chest. For nearly 2 days they worked to sustain him, but his strength ebbed away. On 11/05/1870, he died, leaving a widow and children who had watched the attack at close hand. An inquest followed. The physicians described the fatal injury. Witnesses from the ferry recounted the approach of the veiled woman, the accusation, and the shot. The coroner's jury returned a finding that Alexander Parker Crittenden had died from a criminal act committed by Laura D. Fair. Laura herself had been arrested as soon as the El Capitan docked. Taken into custody, she gave her name without concealment and acknowledged that she had known Crittenden for years. The charge of murder was formally laid, and a case that had begun as a private entanglement between a lawyer and a boarding house keeper was now set to be examined in the full light of a San Francisco courtroom. The first trial of Laura D. Fair opened in San Francisco in early 1871, in a crowded courtroom where curiosity, outrage, and morbid fascination sat side by side. The prosecution laid out a plain, severe narrative. They described the long relationship between Laura and Alexander Parker Crittenden, the years of intimacy, the repeated promises that he would divorce his wife Clara, and the gathering resentment as those promises failed. Witnesses from the El Capitan told how she had approached him, veiled, spoken of ruin, and fired a pistol at his chest at close range. To the state, this was deliberate murder, carried out in public, with preparation and resolve. Her defense offered a very different frame. They did not deny that she had pulled the trigger, but argued that at the moment she did so, her reason had been swept away by bodily pain, nervous collapse, and years of strain. Doctors spoke of disordered cycles and periods of intense suffering. Lawyers argued that her mind was unhinged by want of rest and long-standing agitation, that her judgment flickered and failed under the weight of betrayal and exhausted hope. It was one of the earliest American cases in which a woman's supposed temporary insanity, bound up with her physical condition and emotional turmoil, was pressed so heavily upon a jury. When that jury retired and returned, their verdict was unforgiving. Laura D. Fair was found guilty of murder in the first degree. The court sentenced her to death by hanging, fixing a date later in 1871 when the sentence was to be carried out. Yet her counsel did not abandon her. They moved at once for a new trial and then appealed to the California Supreme Court, arguing that the jury had been wrongly instructed and that key points of law had been mishandled. In 1872, the higher court set aside the conviction and ordered that Laura be tried again, opening the way for a second examination of her act on the San Francisco Bay. The second trial took place later in 1872, again in San Francisco, but under a different judge and with the shadow of the first death sentence hanging over every word. Once more, the ferry, the pistol, and the last moments of Alexander Parker Crittenden's life were set out in careful detail. This time, however, the defense centered even more firmly on the idea that Laura's reason had been temporarily overborne, that years of strain, ill health, and broken promises had left her mind in a state where, for a brief and terrible interval, she could not rightly weigh what she was doing. Doctors returned to the stand, describing her as nervous, exhausted, subject to violent disturbances bound up with her physical condition. When the jury retired, they faced the same stark facts as their predecessors. When they returned, they acquitted her, accepting that she was not legally responsible for murder at the moment she fired the shot. In the months that followed, the case did not fade. It was taken up in editorials and in meetings by women who argued that Laura Fair's story showed how easily a woman's life could be ruined by a man's unkept pledges, while the law looked chiefly at her final act and not at the years that led to it. Figures such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton spoke of the double standard that judged male infidelity lightly and female passion harshly. Others, just as firmly, insisted that a dangerous precedent had been set, that a woman who had killed in public view had escaped the gallows because sentiment and gender had swayed the jury. The phrase emotional insanity began to circulate more widely, and with it, the uneasy sense that the rigid lines of guilt and innocence were less straight than they had once seemed. For Laura herself, the years after 1872 were quieter but never entirely free from the shadow of what had happened on 11/03/1870. She gave lectures for a time, wrote about her life, and tried to shape how the world would remember her, presenting herself not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a woman driven beyond endurance by deception and loss. As the decades turned, the public's attention moved on, and she lived out the remainder of her life away from the courtroom and the front pages. She died in 1919, an old woman whose name still carried, for those who remembered it, the echo of that shot on the San Francisco Bay. When we look back now, what we see is not a simple figure. Laura D. Fair can be read as a calculating woman who chose a moment when escape was impossible and fired at a man in front of his family. She can also be seen as someone pushed to the edge by repeated bereavements, financial uncertainty, and 7 years bound to a promise that was never kept. The law spoke twice in her case, first with a death sentence and then with an acquittal, and left behind a trail of argument about passion, responsibility, and the place of women in a harsh legal order. I would invite you to sit with your own response to her story. How did you feel listening to the path from a young widow in the South and the mining towns of the West to a veiled figure on a ferry deck in 1870? Do you believe that true justice was done when one jury condemned her and another set her free, or does the outcome still trouble you? And, perhaps most unsettling of all, do you think that, in different forms and under different names, a tragedy like this could still unfold today, where promises, dependence, and desperation meet in a single, irrevocable act? We are about to uncover a mystery buried for more than a century in old newspaper columns. So sit back and we will open the file of a case almost forgotten. Madeleine Hamilton Smith was born in Glasgow in 1835, the daughter of a prosperous architect whose work helped shape the growing city. She came into a household that looked out over the new, orderly streets of the Victorian middle class, a world of drawing rooms, servants, and careful appearances. Her father's success placed the family firmly among the comfortable elite, with a townhouse in a respectable district, and summers spent away from the smoke and noise. From an early age, Madeleine was expected to be polished rather than practical. She was educated at home and in select schools for young ladies, taught to write an elegant hand, to converse in French, to play the piano, and to keep her feelings under quiet control. Her future, as her parents imagined it, lay in a suitable marriage within her own class, a union that would preserve the family's standing and keep fortune and reputation intact. In the middle years of the 1850s, Madeleine Hamilton Smith moved from girlhood into the closely supervised world of a young upper-class woman in Glasgow. She lived with her family in a comfortable house on Blythswood Hill, her days shaped by visits, music, and the careful rituals of a class that prized propriety above almost everything else. Within that setting, she met Pierre-Émile Langelier, a commercial clerk some years older than she was, of modest income and foreign birth, lodging in the city and working hard to hold his position. What began as a passing acquaintance deepened into a secret attachment. Against the wishes she knew her parents would have had, Madeleine arranged meetings, slipped out under pretexts, and wrote to him again and again until there were hundreds of letters between them. Before long, the relationship included physical intimacy, a fact that left her bound to him in a society where such a step, outside marriage, could ruin a woman's future entirely. As the 1850s moved toward their close, the course of Madeleine Smith's life began to tilt in a way that would later seem inevitable. Within the high-ceilinged drawing rooms of Glasgow's West End, her parents were working quietly to secure for her a respectable match, and before long her acquaintance with a well-placed suitor, William Minnock, began to deepen into a formal understanding. At the same time, in a much smaller world of back stairs and dimly lit streets, her bond with Pierre-Émile Langelier had become strained and quarrelsome. She had given herself to him in a way that Victorian convention would never forgive, and now she wanted to draw back, marry within her class, and consign their years of letters and clandestine meetings to the past. Langelier refused to accept this. He kept every letter she had ever sent, and he made it plain that if she abandoned him, he could place those letters before her father and ruin her future. In this atmosphere of secret visits and mounting pressure, he fell ill more than once after meeting her, complaining of violent pains and sickness. Around the same time, she obtained quantities of arsenic from chemists in Glasgow, stating that she needed it, as many ladies then claimed, for her complexion or to deal with vermin. The stage was being set, step by quiet step, for a fatal encounter. As the months of 1856 gave way to 1857, the secret understanding between Madeleine Smith and Pierre-Émile Langelier moved from reckless romance into something darker and more precarious. At home in Glasgow, her parents were looking upward, not downward, for her future. A suitable suitor, the prosperous merchant William Minot, began to appear more often in her company, invited to the house, received with the quiet approval that comes when families see rank and income properly aligned. For a daughter of the professional middle class, obedience to such plans was not merely expected, it was woven into the very fabric of respectability. Yet the past could not simply be put aside. Langelier still held dozens of her letters filled with language that, if ever read outside the privacy of their exchange, would mark her forever as a fallen woman. When she attempted to cool the relationship, to delay meetings, to put him off with vague phrases about ill health and family duties, he answered by reminding her of the letters and hinting that he might place them before her father. The threat was not shouted in public, but it hung over her like a sentence already written. In early 1857, while her formal engagement to Minnock was taking shape, Madeleine went to chemists in Glasgow to purchase arsenic on more than one occasion, giving the accepted explanations of the day about improving her complexion or dealing with vermin. Around the same time, Langelier suffered bouts of severe gastric illness that left him weakened and in pain, and yet he continued to seek meetings with her, still demanding, still holding on to those letters. Step by step, the tension around their secret rose, until there seemed to be no easy way for either of them to step back without ruin. On the evening of 03/22/1857, the streets of Glasgow lay under a cold, unsettled sky, and in a modest lodging house, a young clerk dressed himself to go out, noting in his diary that he hoped at last to see Madeleine. Pierre-Émile Langelier left his rooms after dusk, telling his landlady that he had an appointment, and stepped into the chill air, heading toward the more fashionable part of the city where the Smith family lived. What passed between them that night was never witnessed in open court, but much later it would be said that he kept his tryst, and that he took something to drink before making his way back through the darkened streets toward home. He returned to his lodgings late, complaining of sudden, violent illness. Through the night, his landlady heard him retching, groaning, calling out in pain as he struggled for breath. Neighbors moved softly along the passage, a doctor was sent for, and still the sounds from his room rose and fell, then faded. In the early hours of 03/23/1857, as the city slept, the house grew quiet again, and by the time the grey light slipped through the curtains, Pierre-Émile Langelier was dead. In the small hours of 03/23/1857, the quiet of Glasgow was broken inside the lodging house where Pierre-Émile Langelier rented his room. He was found there in the early morning, in violent distress, and a doctor was called. Despite efforts to ease his suffering, he died later that morning. The sudden nature of his death and the symptoms that had marked his final hours led the medical men who examined him to suspect poison rather than illness. A post-mortem followed, and tests revealed the presence of arsenic in his body in quantities that could not be explained away as accidental. The police began by looking at his past few weeks, and very quickly his private correspondence came into their hands. Among his possessions, they found a cache of letters in a young woman's hand written over several years, intimate, emotional, and signed by Madeleine Hamilton Smith. The letters established not only a long and secret attachment, but also recent meetings and quarrels. When the officers learned that she had been purchasing arsenic in the weeks before his death, she moved from the periphery of their inquiries to the centre. By the end of 1857, she had been formally arrested and charged. In the summer of 1857, the case of Madeleine Smith came before the High Court of Justiciary in Edinburgh, the Supreme Criminal Court of Scotland. The trial opened on 6/30/1857 in a crowded courtroom where members of the aristocracy sat alongside tradesmen and clerks, all drawn by the promise of scandal and mystery. Madeleine, then in her early 20s, stood charged on 3 counts: administering arsenic on 2 earlier occasions and causing the death of Pierre-Émile Langelier on 3/23/1857 by the same means. She appeared composed, well-dressed, and very much the daughter of a prosperous Glasgow household, in stark contrast to the harshness of the accusation read out before her. The prosecution laid out its case in careful order. Druggists testified that on several dates in early 1857, Madeleine purchased arsenic in noticeable quantities, signing the poison book and stating that it was to be used for cosmetic purposes. Medical witnesses described the symptoms suffered by Langelier and the presence of arsenic in his body after death. Above all, the Crown relied on the great bundle of letters in which she had written to Pierre with passion, then later with coldness and evasion, as her family prepared a more suitable match. The defence, led by experienced counsel, sought to unwind this chain. They argued that in Victorian domestic practice, arsenic was sometimes used in small quantities for the skin, that her purchases, though unwise, did not prove murder. They pointed out that Langelier had kept arsenic himself in his lodgings, that he had spoken of ill health even before the last meetings, and that no witness had seen her hand him a poisoned cup. As for the letters, the defence invited the jury to see them as the imprudent outpourings of a young woman in love, not a blueprint for a crime. After days of argument, the judge summed up, weighing each piece of evidence with deliberate care, reminding the jurors that suspicion, however strong, was not the same as legal proof. On 07/09/1857, the jury retired, then returned with the unique Scottish verdict that would make the case famous. Not proven. Madeleine Smith was not declared innocent, but neither was she found guilty. She was free to leave the dock under a cloud that would never quite lift. In the months after the verdict, Glasgow society found itself divided between outrage and a reluctant, uneasy fascination. For some, the young woman who had stood in the dock was a murderess who had slipped the hangman's rope on a technicality. For others, she was a foolish daughter of privilege who had gambled her future on passion and very nearly paid with her life. The newspapers returned again and again to the letters, to the clandestine meetings, to the arsenic bought over the counter as calmly as any household remedy. The phrase, "not proven," already a feature of Scottish law, took on a sharper edge in drawing rooms and taverns, becoming a byword for suspicion that could never quite settle into certainty. Life in the well-appointed house on Blythswood Square could not continue as if nothing had happened. The Smith family left Glasgow seeking anonymity elsewhere in Britain rather than the constant scrutiny of neighbours who had read every line of the trial reports. The years that followed carried Madeleine far from the city where she had once slipped secret letters into a lover's hand. She eventually crossed the Atlantic, living under other names, marrying and building a quieter existence in the United States. In time, she reached old age in New York, dying there in her 90s, with many of those around her knowing nothing of the arsenic, the letters, or the young man who had died in his boarding house bed. Yet in Scotland her name endured, not so much as a settled villain or a cleared innocent, but as the embodiment of that third verdict that is neither guilt nor exoneration. The case remained in legal textbooks and in the collective memory as a warning about secret lives in respectable streets, about the power of private correspondence, and about how far a jury may go in expressing doubt without granting full forgiveness. To some, she was a calculating woman who learned how to exploit the gaps in the evidence. To others, she was a frightened young person tangled in a web of her own making, crushed between rigid social expectations and a reckless affair that could not be safely ended. As you think back over her story, with its anonymous letters, midnight illnesses, and a verdict that satisfied no one completely, I invite you to pause and notice your own reaction. Did you find yourself believing that Madeleine Hamilton Smith was guilty, or did the uncertainty of the evidence trouble your judgment? Do you feel anger, pity, or simply unease at a life that never again escaped the shadow of suspicion? If you are willing, share how this case made you feel, and what you think about that elusive verdict of not proven in the comments below. Today we are examining a case from the Victorian age, so take a slow breath and we will walk together into the grey, crowded streets of late 19th century London, where a woman named Mary Pearcey would one day step into the shadow of the gallows. She was born Mary Eleanor Wheeler in the middle years of the 1860s somewhere in England, but the records that survive say very little about her childhood. Her family appears to have belonged to the broad belt of the working poor, that great anonymous population who lived by their hands and their wits in the growing cities. There is no firm record of her schooling, but girls in her position usually learned only enough reading and writing to manage small tasks, and then went out early into service or casual work. What we can say with some confidence is that money was never plentiful. In such homes, every shilling mattered. Every piece of worn clothing was patched and repatched, and the future of a daughter depended less on any education than on whom she might attach herself to in adult life. Out of this quiet, dimly lit background, Mary Wheeler would one day emerge in London under a new name, Mary Pearcey. In the later 1880s, Mary Eleanor Wheeler was known in North London under the name Mary Pearcey, a small, dark woman making her way in modest lodgings doing what work she could find. The rooms were narrow, the furniture cheap, and money was never much more than a few coins in hand, but she moved in circles where cabmen, artisans, and small tradesmen passed in and out of her life. Among them was a furniture remover named Frank Hogg, a man of ordinary means whose easy manner and regular visits soon set her apart from the other women in the house. She cooked for him, kept his things, and behaved as though she were his wife in all but law, investing what little security she had in his company. With time, however, Frank began to look elsewhere for a more respectable match. He courted a young woman named Phoebe, who came from a steadier background and offered the promise of a settled home and a lawful family. When he married Phoebe and set up house with her, Mary was left in a strained, ambiguous position, still receiving his visits, still tied to him by habit and feeling, but no longer the woman he acknowledged in public. Outwardly, she remained alone in her small rooms. Inwardly, a triangle had formed that could not last without pain. As the months after the birth of the Hogg's child passed, the balance between the three adults grew more strained. Frank Hogg continued to visit Mary Pearcey in her small rooms, and she in turn remained outwardly friendly with his wife, Phoebe. In the streets of North London, they might be seen together, two young women talking quietly, one the lawful wife with a baby in a perambulator, the other the woman who had once shared the man's home and now lived in a more uncertain position. It was an arrangement that could not remain steady for long. There were reports of letters passing between Mary and Frank, of meetings that did not wholly cease after his marriage. While Phoebe kept house and cared for the child, Mary lived apart, dependent on Frank's visits and whatever sums or small gifts he could provide. It was a life in which she possessed neither the security of marriage nor the clear finality of being cast off. By 1890, the situation had hardened into something perilous. A married household on one side, and on the other, a woman who still saw the husband, still knew the wife and child, and had begun to feel pushed to the margins of a life she had once expected to share more fully. On the 10/24/1890, the routine of that small corner of North London shifted by degrees that only later would be understood. In the afternoon, neighbours saw Phoebe Hogg leave her home with her little daughter in the perambulator, the child bundled against the chill, the mother explaining that she was going to call on Mrs. Pearcey. Witnesses later spoke of Mary receiving her quietly at her lodgings, the women seen together at the door before it closed behind them. As dusk fell, people noticed Mary again, out in the streets, pushing the same black perambulator, its load now oddly heavy and covered. By nightfall, Phoebe and the child were no longer seen alive. By the evening of 10/24/1890, the quiet streets of Hampstead were already dark when a passerby noticed what looked at first like a bundle of discarded clothing on a rubbish heap off Crossfield Road. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into the body of a woman, her head and shoulders terribly injured, her clothes soaked and disordered. The police were called, and by lamplight, they saw enough to know that this was no accident. Papers and a wedding ring soon confirmed her as Phoebe Hogg, the lawful wife of a North London furniture dealer named Frank Hogg. Through the night, officers searched the surrounding districts for any trace of the missing child who was known to have been with her. In the afternoon of 10/25/1890, a small body was discovered in Finchley, laid out in a back garden area off a quiet lane. It was the Hoggs' 18-month-old daughter, known in the family as Tiggy, with signs that she had likely been smothered. When inquiries established that Phoebe had been on her way to visit another woman and that a black perambulator had been seen pushed through the streets that evening, attention turned toward a woman in North London who had long been connected with Frank Hogg, Mary Pearcey. By the time the night of 10/24/1890 had fully fallen, the quiet streets around Hampstead were no longer truly quiet. A local man walking along a rough stretch near Crossfield Road came upon the body of a woman lying near a heap of rubbish. Her clothes were disordered, her head terribly injured, and there was nothing to suggest either accident or simple street robbery. He raised the alarm, and before long a police constable and a doctor were standing over the still form of Phoebe Hogg, noting the damage to her skull and throat and the absence of her little child. The missing infant was now as pressing a question as the manner of the mother's death. Within hours, reports reached the police of a black perambulator stained and abandoned in a nearby street. Further searching toward Finchley brought the bleak answer. The small body of Tiggy Hogg was found, lifeless, set aside as if she had been no more than a parcel to be discarded. The doctors who examined mother and child spoke in restrained terms of severe blows and suffocation. From these first facts, and from sightings of a woman pushing a pram that afternoon, the line of inquiry began to narrow toward one name: Mary Pearcey. The trial of Mary Pearcey was held at the Central Criminal Court in London in the closing weeks of 1890, under the shadow of the recent Whitechapel murders and a public already accustomed to lurid headlines. The courtroom was crowded as the charge of willful murder was read out, first in respect of Phoebe Hogg, then of the child, Tiggy. The prosecution set out a stark, almost relentless case. A married woman invited to a private house, later found dead in a North London lane. Her child discovered lifeless not far away. And in the modest rooms of the accused, blood on the walls, on the ceiling, on the furnishings, and on the tools of daily life. They argued that no innocent explanation could possibly account for such a scene. Witness after witness was called. Neighbours spoke of seeing Mary Pearcey pushing the black perambulator through the streets on the evening of 10/24/1890. Police officers described the search of the house and the stains they found. Medical men testified to injuries on Phoebe Hogg's head and neck and to signs of suffocation in the little girl. The prosecution suggested a deliberate plan carried through with determination and told the jury that jealousy and resentment, however deep, could never excuse such acts. The defense, with little room to move, did what it could to soften the picture. Counsel hinted at a woman worn down by disappointment, described her as quiet, even kindly in ordinary life, and suggested that any violence might have taken place in a moment when reason gave way. They criticized the handling of some physical exhibits and questioned whether all the blood could truly be connected to a single evening. But Mary herself, standing in the dock, could offer no convincing account of why her rooms, her clothing, and her household objects were so stained, beyond the thin remark that she had been trying to kill mice. In the end, the judge summed up firmly for the Crown, and the jurors retired with the weight of 2 deaths upon them. They kept Mary Pearcey in Newgate Prison through the last weeks of 1890, as the newspapers returned again and again to her case. On 12/23/1890, she was hanged within the prison walls, the sentence of the court carried out in the usual manner for the time. Reports spoke of her walking steadily to the scaffold, offering no lengthy last speech, her fate sealed in a few silent minutes. Outside, people gathered in the streets near the prison, trading rumors about her demeanor and about what she might have confessed at the end, though no such confession was ever placed on the record. In the years that followed, her name did not quite fade. Exhibits said to be connected with her crime, a dark perambulator and even a length of rope, were reported as drawing crowds in popular displays, tokens of a morbid curiosity that clung to her memory. Commentators went on debating whether a woman could have committed the mutilations in Whitechapel, and some insisted on placing her among the possible faces behind the name that haunted London. Yet no solid proof ever bound her to those other murders. That link remained, and remains, only an echo of fear and speculation. After 12/23/1890, there are no further chapters in her own life, only the shadow she left behind in criminal history. Was Mary Pearcey nothing more than a jealous murderer who destroyed a mother and child? Or was she also a convenient vessel for the city's wider nightmares about women who stepped beyond their allotted place? Did justice, as the law understood it in 1890, truly answer the questions raised by this case, or did it merely close the file while leaving the unease untouched? And as you think back over her story, over the pram in the dark streets and the stains on the kitchen walls, how does it leave you feeling? If you wish, you can share your thoughts, your sympathy, or your condemnation in the comments below and weigh for yourself what this sad, brutal episode says about its time and perhaps about ours.